Thank you. So yeah, let's talk about the issue specifically. So I'll load the issue up so we've got it in the recording as well. Share my screen. So yeah, the problem is, well, it's not a problem. The thing we're trying to solve is that we want to be able to export the underlying data from ClickHouse or Cube, or get the data out in some way that means it's portable. So yeah, there's kind of two options that we've got so far. One is, in my mind at least, low effort, medium reward, and the other one is sort of high effort, high reward. So using Cube.js to surface a data export. So this is sort of the easy thing to do, and as far as I'm aware, there's no engineering work, or there is documentation work. So just to recap for anyone who's watching this, by just listing a list of the dimensions, which map pretty much one-to-one to ClickHouse columns, or ClickHouse rows, I should say, that allows us to essentially output a table that looks like this, which is pretty much a ClickHouse export. There are a few fairly glaring downsides to this. One of which is that the data is returned in JSON format. So that would require whoever's exporting this data using this method would have to either be okay with that, or process it themselves into a CSV, or whatever other format they required. It would by default be in JSON. A couple of other problems are that there's a SQL limit. Whether that's set in Cube by us, which I'm not sure of, but even if it's not, there will come a point where if you're trying to export 100,000, a million, 10 million rows, you're going to hit some limits somewhere, and that's going to be slow or even impossible in some cases. We could probably do some magic with like pre-aggregations, but then we end up storing essentially an entire copy of a ClickHouse table in a pre-aggregation, which doesn't really solve any problems. So there'd probably be some, like, whoever's exporting this data would probably have to implement pagination for it as well. So it could get long, it could get complicated. The main glaring upside to this is that there's no engineering work to do right now. So someone could send this query via the API, the proxy API, sorry, this query or something similar via the proxy API, and get the correct data out. So anyone with maintainer access to a project could, in theory, do that as long as they had access to product analytics.
Okay, so I guess that's where my point of confusion was, because I was looking at the screenshot of the playground, which is not enabled in production mode.
Gotcha.
It is it is actually enabled right now in the production cluster, which it shouldn't be the case, but that's a different problem. But I think what you just said about, so querying that, all of that, the input and the output, it happens through our proxy with the Cube API, right? So that is okay. That would make sense then in terms of no engineering work, provided that end users are fine with the JSON output, which that's, if for zero effort, I'm sure that's fine.
Yeah, so it would require some sort of, we would have to document what the columns were, and I guess if we move to Snowplow, that could change. But again, it's something that we could document as part of our standard documentation process. So yeah, in terms of no engineering work, that does work with the caveats that I've outlined in terms of limits. And obviously the hope is that those using this will hit hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of data points, which would be great for us in terms of user adoption, but will give us trouble, and we'd need to probably load test it or test it pretty hard. What happens to the GitLab API if we are waiting on a third party like Cube to respond with tens of megabytes of data? I assume it times out, but I don't know. So that could well
I think on this proposal, that really clarifies my point of confusion, because I was not quite sure if when we said no additional work, if we were talking about just the backend piece, or sounds like since you just said the maintainers, I, as a customer, would be able to use the docs, go directly to do the download with scaling considerations, which I think that gets me back to where I start with my initial understanding of customer could use the documentation to get what they need, which I'd be very happy about for our first boring sort of iteration.
Okay.
Definitely on the scale comment, if we do get to that point, and I'm assuming we will, that seems like something we could come back and revisit at some point. But at least for our first iteration of export, really our goal is to make sure people aren't locked into GitLab if they want to get their data to take it to another service provider, or if they want to do some custom processing with Ruby or Python or whatever, we're not locking their data in. So, I mean, that makes me feel good about this again, since we clarified that point. So thank you for walking through that.
Okay, so that makes sense. I think we're on the same page there, and it makes in my mind at least, it makes a first do nothing first iteration, which is always nice. In terms of not locking people in, like this goes some way towards that. Short of a more extensive solution, which I'll talk about in a minute, there's nothing to stop us if we're only talking about a handful of customers initially. Anyway, I assume if one of those is very keen on exporting their data, I assume there's nothing to stop us from manually doing so on their behalf. Obviously, that's not a scalable solution, but if someone wants their data, we have it and we can give it to them. We can even upload it into object storage for them from ClickHouse, which leads me nicely to sort of the better, for want of a better word, solution, which is to export the ClickHouse data directly from ClickHouse to object storage of their choice, or whatever it's configured to. So GitLab's already got support for object storage, I assume S3 and GCP, or possibly others, I'm not really sure. And the idea would be to start a background job, which would export the ClickHouse table using native ClickHouse functions for exporting, save that file locally on the file system, and then upload it to whichever defined object storage that self-managed instance has, or in the case of .com, wherever object storage for us. There's the first thing that jumps out at me there is that on .com, I assume we're the administrators of the object storage, which means we could be storing potentially very large files in object storage, and there's a cost implication there. But the big thing here is that it's scalable in the sense of we just use ClickHouse to export the file, and any number of records should be able to handle this, especially if it's running in a background job, but it will take time.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and on the large file storage, I mean, we might be able to manage that with pricing and packaging. Maybe you only get one export a day, or whatever we decide.
Yeah.
But yeah, we could definitely find a way to manage that. Is
yeah,
this
and
what
I mean,
you think is the right solution long term?
I think so. This feels like the scalable solution, in the sense of, even if we only provide the download to be available for, I don't know, a few hours or 24 hours, and then remove the file from object storage. You know, we're providing it as an export. It won't be available forever. If you want to get it again, you'll have to generate a new export, which should keep costs down to a fairly manageable level. Yeah, like this is the solution, but the big red flag, as I'm sure Dennis is thinking right now, is that it requires direct access from the GitLab application to ClickHouse, which currently we only have via Cube's abstraction layer. So that becomes an infra task then.
Yeah, and we don't want to directly expose ClickHouse anyways, and we want to implement a proxy in front of that as well, which I've mentioned before, CH proxy. And we'd have to map out that whole interaction model. But we've spoken about this particular solution before anyways, and I think the last time we've actually had a synchronous discussion about exporting. And so, I mean, we'll have to map that out, but ultimately, I think, yeah, I also believe it's the right solution. And so I guess in terms of I was curious about the weighting, since we don't know how it's going to fully interact with like the infrastructure stuff, but I guess, yeah, I'd be curious to know like what your implementation plan is based off of your current weight here. I guess this is an option too, but yeah, which we'll get to, but yeah.
So yeah, the
I kinda wanted to-
implementation
go
would be
ahead.
made up of a background job, so an export background job, which would in the background make the ClickHouse call to generate the file. Presumably, I don't know how the internals work on ClickHouse. I don't know if an exporting of a single table locks anything else. So we need to make sure that it doesn't affect any other consumers or any other projects. But assuming it doesn't, then the ClickHouse command, which we'd run directly via chproxy, would export a file, which we'd save somewhere locally temporarily. And then that same background job would then use fog for whichever object storage was configured, and upload it somewhere useful and make it available to a set number of users. I assume we'd have a signed URL, which we would then pass to whoever generated the export job. And then put a lifecycle rule on that file for it to expire after a certain amount of time, at which point we can delete the file and that person has got access to their data and can do what they like with it.
And if we were to do something like email notification when that job is completed, is that an additional heavier lift, or is that still keep you?
Not. It keeps you within the uncertainty of a 5, I would say.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think this is still the long term. Like, I mean, we still have to figure out the details of the interaction model of all of it, but I think it makes sense. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm feeling good about it.
Well, in which case, I will write up 2 issues, 1 for each of these, and ping you both on them, just so we make sure we're in agreement about what it is we want to do. And then, yeah, we can schedule that first one as soon as you like, Sam. And the second one, as Dennis said, might just take a bit longer to think through exactly how it's going to work.
Sure.
Yeah, I think for the second one, we'll want you won't be well, you might be involved for the second option, or exporting the object storage. I believe there will be follow-up Spike investigations for front end in terms of how to like trigger the job, or we do API only, but also for the infrastructure Spike investigation, which that's why I said you might actually be involved. But yeah, I think once we have the plan laid out from your perspective from the back end, then we can start the investigations from the other angles.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll do that this afternoon. So you should have those later today or tomorrow.
Great.
Awesome.
Okay.
You know, this was good. I'm glad we got the chance to sync up on this on the call. Much easier than going back and forth on the issue. So
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I saw the playground screenshot and I was just like, maybe I'm just misunderstanding something. So
that's cool. That makes sense. Awesome. Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add?
I think I'm good for now.
Yep. As far as export's concerned, I think we're good. And then we'll follow up on these and get working on the documentation side of it.
All right. I'll get those sorted then. I'll upload this to Unfiltered as well. All right. See you later then, folks.
Awesome.
Thanks, folks. Talk to you.
Bye.